Prof. Saad for the introduction. Can somebody guide me with the... So this is the canvas slide. The pointer. So this is to go forward, backward, and this is the pointer. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على أشرف الأنبياء المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله جميعا. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizing committee and the scientific committee for invite me to be a presenter in this wonderful conference in Taif, back to town. I'm also grateful that the moderator of the session is our teachers, I would suggest, Prof. Saad Al-Saadi and Prof. Abdurrahman Nimari, and I'm very honored that I present with their moderation. I hope my presentation will not look odd to you, as I'm not here to tell you to ventilate and intubate newborn infants. So Prof. Hani Ali and Professor can't remember the other one. They had already told you that don't intubate, try to prevent chronic lung disease, etc. So I hope my presentation would bid me out to you, and I hope you will not take the home message that I recommend to intubate and ventilate newborn infants. However, in our unit, the primary mode of respiratory support is non-invasive ventilation. However, we keep ventilation as a rescue when baby does not fail the non-invasive ventilatory support, then we can intubate them. So I hope this message is clear to you at the beginning of my presentation. I have no actual or potential conflict of interest in relation to this presentation. My outline of my presentation, I will have some introduction slides. I will have share with you the goals of respiratory support or ventilation of newborn infants. I will go through the ventilation-induced lung injury. I think both the eminent speaker this morning had alluded significantly to this concept, so it made my presentation much easier. I will go through the physiological benefits of volume target ventilation. Again, Prof. Hani Ali I'm looking at him now. I'm not advocating intubating, but when you intubate, you have to look at the best way how you ventilate those newborn infants. I will just share with you some of the evidence of volume target ventilation. I will share you with, I would suggest my own experience or guidelines to use volume targeted, and adding some evidence behind this approach, and end by some take-home messages. The goal of in the care of preterm infant in the 80s and 90s to make them alive, for them to survive. And that had leveled off almost 20 years ago. So you look at in the United States, in Canada, in North Europe, in many parts of, they have developed countries, the survival rate for infant less than 1,500 did not improve for the last maybe 15 or 20 years. However, there is in the developing country, I think there is still a room for improving survival. So for the past 2 decades, the emphasis has shifted from improving viability to improve functional outcome of preterm infants. So the idea, you have a baby discharge home 25 fecal, and he has IVH grade 4, he had BVL, he had spastic diplegia. I don't think this is good, because definitely we like them to live, but we like to look at them as they have intact survival. And unfortunately, the incidence of chronic lung disease subsequent to ventilation has not improved significantly since the introduction of exogenous surfactant in the early 1990s. And there is a paradigm shift from why and how to ventilate neonates, especially premature infant, to how best to do it and support their respiratory system without sequelae of ventilator device. And I think both speakers this morning had talked about Columbia approach by Dr. Wong from the 70s, where the approach was to support them without intubation with CPAP. And that had ignited the interest in non-invasive respiratory support. And we see that there is a plethora of clinical practice and research in this field. And Prof. Hani had alluded to that this morning. This is our campus in Jeddah. We have King Saud bin Abdulaziz University of Health Sciences in Jeddah, and this is a campus. We have almost 3,000 students, and we have almost 8 colleges providing healthcare studies, healthcare science to our students. I wish to see you all there. So let's share with you, when we intubate or provide respiratory support for a newborn infant and a premature infant in particular, we should have goal. Our goal is to maintain adequate gas exchange with a minimum of lung injury, with a minimum of hemodynamic impairment, with minimum of neurological injury, and minimize the work of breathing. Ideal breath type. I mean, when we intubate or ventilate or provide respiratory support, we like to have this breath synchronized with the patient's spontaneous ventilator effort, to have an adequate and consistent tidal volume and minute ventilation at the lowest airway pressure required. We have to respond to changes in of pulmonary mechanics and patient demand. As we know, we have admitted 25 fecal, he got surfactant, he's now in CPAP. We have to respond to the changes. Sometimes we have to do things because the baby is getting better or getting worse. And we have to provide the lowest possible work of breathing. VILI is a term, I thought it is a new term, but when I looked at the literature, this is probably the first statement actually indicating ventilation-induced lung injury is something dated almost 275 years ago by John Forthgill. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation may be better than using mechanical bellows to inflate lung, because the lung of a man can peer without injury as long as the man who can exert, which by the bellows cannot always be determined. So this VILI is something not new. It's been in the literature for more than or around three centuries. I think both speakers had told you this. Remember, when you ventilate a newborn infant and premature, you are dealing with a developing lung, and definitely for a premature infant, he could deliver a 25 fecal and he even didn't enter the alveolar stage. So we have to know this is very delicate organ and you can injure it so easily. What are the mechanics of VILI or ventilation-induced lung injury? We talked about barotrauma, pressure-related trauma, volume, atelectic trauma when you collapse the lung, and biotrauma and oxytrauma. I probably think these are 5 devils, I call it, for the lung. However, I think volutrauma has significant impact on the lung, and probably I'll tell you the evidence in the next few slides. This is the famous pressure volume loop where we look at the volume. Look at this is the pressure, and here the volume. As you know that when you inflate the lung, you reach a stage where you can reach the maximum distensibility of the lung. And here where we have the high volume injury zone. So when you inflate the lung more than it should be, then that will lead to a lung injury. At the same time, when you close the lung and atelect the lung, then you lead to also a low zone lung injury. If there is any animal data to suggest that volutrauma rather than pressure is the reason, I think I'll just mention you the data from Drivers, almost 1988, Hernandez in 1989, and Adkins on 1991. I'll go through one of the research. This is the effect of pressure and volume. As you can see here, this is the different level of pressure. They have an animal study where they have closed chest and body casts where to prevent the lung from inflating. And you can see that when you have a pressure of 15, the capillary filtration coefficient, which is a measure to indicate lung injury, was not different between closed and body cast. However, when you reach 45, you give pressure 45. If you have a body cast, you have minimal lung injury. So that tell you the volume, not the pressure, is the cause of the lung injury. Now, most of units, and I'll tell you in the United States, published, there is an article published by Barty Kisler. He did survey in USA to look at what centers use volume targeted fair pressure limited. And almost 70, it's about 39% they use volume targeted, and only 69 they use pressure limited. So still it's not a common practice. And this is only 3 years ago data. So here, this slide show you that when we inflate the lung, this is if you have the primary control is the pressure, that means you put the patient on let's say 18 or 16 PIP. you see that the baby is delivered, he got surfactant, he failed then an invasive ventilation, fortunately, so we can intubate him. And then you exert the same pressure, but the baby after surfactant, he improved, his lung complex improved. So you end by the tidal volume will go high. So the problem that you have the pressure limited, but then the tidal volume will increase significantly. And I'll tell you, I worked in some other units where they don't have pressure volume targeted. I can see the baby in a pressure of 16. I look at the tidal volume, exhale tidal volume, it's 12, and for a baby who's 1 kilo. And people are okay with that. So I think this is not okay. I'm sure our colleague here tell you this is too high tidal volume. So I think the pressure limited has a problem that you don't know what's happening. And sometimes we depend on chest expansion and other modes, way of to tell you, but this is not the case always inside the lung. So when a pressure limited, you will, with the same baby, few hours later, with the same pressure, you tend to give almost double the tidal volume needed. Well, if you put them in a volume target ventilation, so you fix the tidal volume. You say, okay, this baby is, I'll give him 5 ml per kg, he's 1 kilo, he failed non-invasive. Then you put him in a volume targeted. So you keep the tidal volume constant. So the baby is requiring, let's say, 18 pressure. But when you give him surfactant, he get better, compliance improve. You find with the same tidal volume needed or targeted, you require much less pressure. So there is an auto weaning. The baby requires 18 with tidal volume of 5 ml per kg. Few hours later, he requires 16 or 14. And this is probably the advantage of volume targeted ventilation. So what's the rationale of using volume targeted ventilation? As I told you, polytrauma is not barotrauma, and this is based on animal and clinical trials. Hyperventilation and excessive volume delivery are common if you compare pressure limited versus volume targeted. Hypocarbia, and we know hypocarbia is linked to a higher rate of BBD and also BVL. So hypocarbia, which is a low PCO2, less than 35 millimeter mercury, found to be much higher in babies who were pressure limited ventilation compared to volume targeted ventilation. Again, I'm advocating for the self-interest. So I think this is a key, maybe I've seen it in today, but I think for me, it's a key publication, and I think a game changer for me. This is a Cochrane review published almost 5 years ago by Klingberg and his group. And the Cochrane review is they have 20 randomized control trial, 16 parallel trial, and 4 crossover. And they included in this Cochrane review above 1,000 preterm infants or newborn infants. So the objective of this Cochrane review was to compare the most important outcome, death before hospital discharge, death or BBD, air leak and pneumothorax, IVH total and severe ones, BVL, a neurodevelopmental outcome. And I'll go through one. I dissected on these each element. This is, I make it simple to you, hopefully. This is hospital, this for hospital discharge. So there was a 25% less mortality in the volume targeted compared to the pressure limited. However, the CI included one, so it is not statistically significant. However, when you combine this or BBD, which is the classic definition, oxygen required by 36, they found in this Cochrane review that you reduce this outcome by 27%. So you have this 27% less this or BBD if you ventilate using volume targeted compared to pressure limited, and the number needed to benefit was 8, and it was statistically significant. Pneumothorax, and I'll tell you, some units they have higher rate of pneumothorax, and some units, our fellow, when you have one pneumothorax, they will come and fight to do it because they don't have it in their units, because I think they have some element of good respiratory supports, and I'm sure Prof. Hani and others have seen this in many units. So here, pneumothorax, almost 48%. So you reduce almost by half pneumothorax if you use volume targeted versus pressure limited. And the number needed to treat was 20. Days of mechanical ventilation, 1.35 day shorter in volume targeted. And the CI did not include the point of confidence, so it's significant. Grade 3, 4, and 4 IVH. The data has suggested that 47% less in volume targeted compared to pressure limited, and the number needed to benefit was 11. Combined outcome of BVL with or without grade 3 and 4 IVH was 53% if you use volume targeted versus pressure limited, and the number needed to benefit was 11. However, when they looked at the long-term outcome, I think because only 2 studies in that Cochrane review had documented this outcome, the results are not very different. There is 16% less severe disability, but the CI was wide and is not significant. However, if you combine severe disability with a death, there was a trend toward lower outcome of that specific outcome by 46%, but the CI just crossed the point of confidence, which is 1.06. So this is why it's statistically not significant. Hypocapnia, 50% lower rate of hypocapnia if you use a volume targeted compared to pressure limited, and the number needed to treat was 3. 3 is very high. That means for every 3 babies, you could have lower hypocarbia more in pressure limited. And we know hypocarbia is linked to, lung injury more. It's linked to adverse neurological outcome. BBD was significant also. Number need treat was 8. There was almost in this Cochrane review 34% in pressure limited versus 22 in volume targeted. So to summarize this, I call it key publication or game changer in my view. You have less BBD at 36 weeks 6. You have less death or BBD. You have less pneumothorax. You have less severe IVH grade 3 and 4. You have less BVL without IVH, and you have less hypocarbia. However, there was no difference in survival. There was a trend toward better survival in volume targeted, and there is no difference in all IVH, but in the severe one are different, and no different in severe disability. And moreover, this Cochrane review found no other increased adverse outcome for volume targeted versus pressure limited. However, we need to study further study are needed to identify whether how to enhance our volume target ventilation, and trying to see the long-term outcome, which is neurodevelopmental outcome. Surprisingly, that in US, still only 39% of Martin Kisler and Ashish Gupta did the survey through the neonatal prenatal section of American Academy. They sent survey. However, this response rate was only 22%. So they analyzed the response rate from survey, and this is the data. 81% of Canadian centers, they had use volume target if they need to intubate. I'm not talking about non-invasive. I'm talking if the baby is intubated, then he will be placed in what mode of ventilation. In Canada, it's 80%, 1%, and 39% in states. In states is different. Northwest, I think, in Seattle, and maybe close to Canada there. So the in Seattle and the other Northwest was 77, and Northeast was only 32%. Interesting, in this study, they looked at academic center used to use volume target more than pressure limited. They found that the people who have a shorter practice, between 10 to 15, they use volume targeted. Those who have more than 20 years practice, they still use pressure limit. I think this is probably somebody, these volume targets invented after his time. They will tell you this pressure limit is okay, and for them to change is not easy. While maybe the fellowship in the after 2000, they have probably more practice with it, and they have probably more utilization. Then part of the survey, they asked what is the reason for those group why they did not use volume targeted. And I have to warn you again, this is only 22% response rate. So this is a drawback of that survey, because it didn't include almost 78% of the NICUs. They found that the lack of understanding was the commonest reason for not to use the volume targeted. Not available in 28%. Lack of training and experience, 13%. 11.5% administrative issue. Maybe the chair doesn't like it, so I say, no, we don't use it. And 6% were missing. So the commonest variable not to use it was lack of understanding, or lacking, not convinced with the evidence of its use. sorry, I'm not advocating for any ventilator. I have no interest in any of them. But in the data presented by Martin Kizler, they looked at the frequency of ventilator in states. Draeger used, it's a German company, but I think it's 68% of NICUs in the United States, based on the survey of 22, they use Draeger, either VN 500, 31.6%, 26.4, they use the Babylog 8000, which is the old model of VN, and only 10% they use Abeta. The second commonest machine to use to ventilate newborn infant was Marquette Servo I, about 33%. And these are the VN 500, the Babylog, and then the Servo I. I'm not advocating for any ventilator. I'm just showing you the data from a scientific publication. So sorry, this is I would say experience more than science. What I suggest that when you start, when the baby fails, non-invasive ventilation, fail CPAP, which is hopefully not that common, then I would suggest to start baby on 4 to 5 ml per kg during the acute phase of acute respiratory distress syndrome. Data I will show you later, published almost 14 years ago, they found that infants who are in a smaller baby, the one less than 800, they may require higher tidal volume because they have a large dead space. So maybe the tidal volume will be need higher to compensate for the relatively large dead space. Meconium aspiration syndrome, they are known to require higher tidal volume, around 6. And higher tidal volume is needed. We see babies sometimes in a ventilator, and then we found at day 1, he will probably require certain tidal volume. But later, at 3 weeks, they require higher tidal volume to achieve the same minute ventilation. And maybe because we injured the lung, that's why we need higher tidal volume. This is the data from published almost 15 years ago. They tried to relate the birth weight with the tidal volume. And you see that 400 gram, they require around 6 ml. If you go to 0.5, around 5.5. So this slide tells you that smaller baby, lower birth weight, they may require lower or higher tidal volume. This data is also published by Sharma in Journal of Prenatalology almost 7 years ago. When they compare the minute ventilation and tidal volume in meconium aspiration to achieve the same CO2, they found infants who have in the meconium aspiration group, they require higher tidal volume in 6 ml compared to 4.8 for non-meconium aspiration. This is another data. This is by Martin Kizler and his group, published long time ago, to see do babies require higher tidal volume as they spend time in the NICU. And this is to achieve the same PCO2, you may require higher. So initially you require 5 to achieve PCO2 44. However, when you reach day 18 to 20, you require higher tidal volume to achieve the same minute ventilation and gas exchange. How we adjust tidal volume? We adjust the tidal volume usually by 0.2 to 0.5 ml per kg up and down according to the blood gas, to the clinical situation. Avoid reducing tidal volume around than 4. I see sometimes people go down to 3. This is not good because you collapse the lung. And to avoid hypoventilation and atelectatic trauma. Check for leak. Leak is a problem in babies who you put them in a volume target because you need the expired tidal volume to measure in order to give the next PIP level. So when you have a leak, then the machine will think the baby require higher pressure, then it will deliver higher pressure. So, I think some machines have a leak compensation up to 20 to 15%. So, but try to make sure that there is no leak or minimal leak to avoid giving more pressure for subsequent breath. BIP, usually, as you know, in pressure limited, we say pressure 16. But when you put the baby on a tidal volume, let's say 4 ml per kg or 5 ml, you keep the maximum PIP usually 15, 20, 25 above to give them a limit. So, for example, if the baby requiring 16 or 15 pressure, you may make the maximum PIP between 18 to 20. Again, monitor for leak. Leak is a problem. I know sometimes the position of the baby, sometimes the tube is small for the airway, etc., especially in babies less than 800 grams. Monitor for leak. This is very important. Eye time. you know, the standard teaching is to keep eye time 0.3, but I see sometimes very small baby who's 500, 600. If you put them later on BSV, they require much shorter eye time. My suggestion to you to keep eye time between 0.25 to 0.3 seconds for infant less than 1 kilo. For infants above that gestational, above that weight, 0.35 to 0.4. How we adjust eye time in a baby ventilated is look at the flow curve to have a short distance between the inspiratory flow and expiratory flow, not a big gap and no clipping. Look at the time constant. We know the time constant could help you to determine the most appropriate eye time, and pressure slope. When you put a patient in pressure, look at the pressure slope, because sometimes the baby, the pressure goes and the slope continue and plateau for some time. This pressure will be seen by the lung. So sometimes you see the pressure slope goes up and then stay long time. That indicates your eye time is long and you need to shorten it. So 3 adjustment by eye time. Look at the flow curve. Look at the time constant. Look at the pressure slope. Set the flow rate between 6 and 7. You know, a preferred type of mode of ventilation. This is my own practice. I'm not advocating. This is an evidence-based. I usually start them with assistant. When they fail, non-invasive, when they fail CPAP and you need to put the tube in their trachea, AC or SIBBV for people who use this term, with volume guarantee for acute lung injury. The SIMV is, I know most of you use it, or some of you. The problem with SIMV, because not every mechanical breath is supported. So you tend, when you put them in SIMV, he will be more tachypnic, because the spontaneous breaths are not supported. So the baby will be slightly tachypnic. So sometimes you may need to increase the tidal volume to compensate for the higher rate. BSV is a good mode for weaning, especially from recovery of acute phase. Make sure that you have an optimal P, because sometimes when you put the patient in BSV, they tend to have very short eye time, and sometimes they collapse their lungs. So to maintain the lung open, probably a good PEEP level is important to ensure good sigh and good lung recruitment. Weaning occur automatically, as I showed you in the slide, that you put the baby in 4 mil or 5 mil, you find he require 18 and now he's 12. And MAB was maybe 12 and now it is 8. Usually we extubate babies when the tidal volume is above the target with a working PIP less than 10 to 12 for infant less than 1 kilo, and less than 12 to 50 when infants they are above 1 kilo. If they have also low FI2 requirement with good, very important, good sustained respiratory effort. And I think nowadays the caffeine helped us all to wake up this morning and babies to breathe more regularly. So what are take-home messages? Volutrauma, than barotrauma cause villi. Volume target ventilation is superior to pressure limited ventilation in almost all important outcome, death, severe IVH, BBL. But I have to tell you that you have to develop a specific strategy for the pathophysiology of that baby, and each baby has a different, and the same baby in one day is different than day 3, then the day 7. So you have to modify and customize your approach according to the disease pathophysiology. Change respiratory support strategy as pathophysiology change. Volume targeted ventilation, not one size fits all. Listen to Professor Hani Ali. Do not ventilate preterm infant and support them within CPAP and an IMV. Thank you.
Thank you, Mansoor. Thank you. Thank you. It's an extensive review. Thanks a lot, Mansoor. You see,